My name is Delaney Cross. I'm 24 years old, and the night my sister's luxury wedding at a French castle fell apart. My phone nearly rattled off my kitchen counter at 1:17 in the morning. I was alone in my small Chicago apartment, still awake, still pretending it didn't get under my skin that my entire family had flown to France without me. My sister was out there living her perfect fairy tale, marrying a wealthy tech founder in the Loire Valley, posting polished photos against stone walls and candlelight, while I was back home staring at a laptop and telling myself I didn't care. The truth was, I had helped organize more of that wedding than anyone would ever admit. I handled vendor emails, updated schedules, fixed last-minute design problems, and kept track of details nobody else wanted to touch. But when it came time to board the plane, suddenly I wasn't the right fit for the image they wanted. That was the kind of family I came from. When the calls started coming in one after another, I knew it wasn't guilt. It was damage control. I answered on the 7th try and heard panic immediately. My mother was crying. My father was talking over her. And in the background, I could hear voices I didn't recognize and the hollow sound of a large room with too much chaos inside it. Then my father rushed out the words that changed everything. There had been an accident at the castle. A vintage rental car had slammed into a historic fountain on the property. Police were involved. The damage was serious. And before I could even process that, he told me the part that made my blood run cold. The rental paperwork was under my name, my authorization, my signature, my responsibility. I hadn't even been invited to the wedding, but somehow I was already being set up to clean up the disaster. So I asked to speak directly to the officer, and the moment he started reading the contract details out loud, I knew exactly what my family had done. Before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from and what the weather's like there right now. I didn't answer my father right away. I just stood there in the middle of my kitchen with that phone pressed to my ear, staring at the dark window over my sink like it might suddenly explain how I had become legally responsible for a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend. The officer on the line was polite, careful, and clearly trying to figure out why the woman whose name appeared on the rental documents was speaking to him from Chicago instead of standing in the station with the rest of her family. He read the contract number, the vehicle description, the time of pickup, and then he said the name on the authorization again. Mine. I asked him to repeat the email tied to the booking, and when he did, I felt something inside me go cold and steady. It was an old family account I had once used to organize travel plans and vendor schedules, back when I was still stupid enough to believe helping them would make them treat me like I belonged. My father cut back in before I could say another word. He told the officer there had been a misunderstanding, then switched to that hard, controlled voice he only used when he wanted me to fall in line. He said I needed to stop making this difficult, book a flight, get to France, and sign whatever needed to be signed so the matter could be handled quietly. That was when I finally understood what this really was. They were not calling me because they loved me. They were calling me because something had gone wrong, and like always, they needed the easiest person to throw in front of the damage. It wasn't even new. 2 years earlier, my father had pushed me into signing temporary paperwork connected to one of his real estate projects because, according to him, my credit looked cleaner, and it would only be for a week. When the numbers stopped matching during an audit, he acted like I had misunderstood everything. My mother cried and said I was being dramatic. My sister rolled her eyes and said I should be grateful I was trusted with important things. That was how it always worked in my family. She got the spotlight, the praise, the expensive mistakes nobody was allowed to call mistakes. I got the spreadsheets, the cleanup, the pressure, and the blame. Even this wedding had followed the same pattern. I built seating charts, fixed invitation issues, updated mood boards, handled vendor revisions, and stayed up late answering emails nobody else wanted to read. But when the final guest list was locked, I was told there wasn't room for unnecessary tension, which was a beautiful way of saying they wanted my labor without my face in the pictures. So when my father said, "Delaney, don't start this again, just help your sister," something in me finally snapped into place. I told him I was not getting on a plane. My mother gasped like I had cursed at her in church. My father lowered his voice and said if I refused to help, I would be destroying my sister's future, humiliating the family, and forcing them to make decisions about my financial support that I might regret. That threat would have worked on me once, maybe even a few months ago, but not that night. Not after hearing a French police officer read out my forged responsibility like it had been waiting there for me all along. I ended the call, locked the old shared card they still had access to, changed every password connected to the family accounts I controlled, and sat back down in front of my laptop. If they wanted to use my name to bury me, then the least I could do was find out exactly how long they had been planning it. The first thing I opened was the shared wedding drive, the same one I had built from scratch because nobody else in my family could keep a folder organized for more than 10 minutes. It was all still there, neatly divided into contracts, guest logistics, design proofs, travel schedules, vendor correspondence, emergency contacts, and payment confirmations. Looking at it made me sick, because every clean little folder was proof of the same humiliating truth. They had trusted me with the work, just never with the love. I clicked into the transportation folder first. There were 3 contracts for guest shuttles, one for a private airport transfer, and one file marked bridal arrival vehicle. That was the one. I opened the PDF and saw my name immediately, sitting there in black type like a stain I couldn't wipe off. Delaney Cross, authorized by client representative. I should have panicked. I should have cried. Instead, I got very still, because the signature attached to it wasn't even a fresh forgery. It was an old scanned version of my signature, one I had used months earlier on a completely unrelated vendor release. They hadn't just faked my name in a rush after the crash. They had saved my signature and kept it ready. I checked the document history. The file had been updated after I was removed from the travel itinerary. Then I checked the activity log. My mother had opened the file twice the week before the wedding. My sister had viewed it the night before the rehearsal dinner. And then I found the email thread. At first, it looked normal. Just back and forth messages with the planner and the rental company about timing, floral ribbons on the vintage car, and photography access at the chateau gates. But farther down, buried in the replies, was the line that made my hands go cold on the keyboard. Use Delaney's information for the liability paperwork. She handles admin for the family anyway. That came from my mother. No hesitation, no apology, no concern that I wasn't even in the country. Just a smooth little sentence, like she was swapping out a billing contact instead of setting me up as the fall girl for a disaster. I kept scrolling. Then I found another message, one my sister had sent from her phone to the planner after midnight. If anything gets messy, it's easier if Delaney is attached to it. She isn't here. For a second I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, reading it over and over because there it was in plain English. Not suspicion, not paranoia, not me being dramatic like they always said. Proof. Cold, casual proof that they had talked about me like a tool. A shield. A name to be used when something expensive needed someone expendable tied to it. And the worst part was how normal they sounded doing it. Like this wasn't crossing a line. Like this was just smart planning. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in weeks. A month before the wedding, there had been a family Zoom call about final logistics. My sister wanted control over every visible detail. My mother kept interrupting everyone. And my father was irritated because the insurance add-ons for certain vendors were costing more than expected. I had been so uneasy during that call that I turned on automatic recording and saved the file to my personal backup folder. I found it in less than a minute. My pulse was hammering now. I clicked play and listened to the kind of conversation people only have when they are completely certain the person they are betraying will never fight back. My father said they needed one clean administrative contact tied to the riskier contracts. My mother said my name made the most sense because I already handled the back end. Then my sister laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Delaney is useful when paperwork needs someone to land on." I closed my eyes when I heard that, not because I was shocked, but because some part of me had waited my whole life for them to say it out loud. I exported the recording, downloaded every email thread, took screenshots of the edit history, copied the metadata from the PDF, and uploaded everything into a new private cloud folder under a name none of them would ever guess. By the time I finished, the shaking in my hands was gone. They still thought I was the quiet one, the easy one, the daughter who would freeze, cry, and do what she was told. But now I had something stronger than anger. I had proof, and for the first time in my life, proof was going to matter more than whatever story they wanted to tell about me. My phone started ringing again before I could even finish organizing the files. This time, it wasn't one call after another. It was a full assault. My mother on video. My father on audio. My sister sending messages so fast they stacked on top of each other before I could read them all. Answer now. Pick up. Stop being selfish. Do you have any idea what you're doing to us? I let them burn through that panic for almost a full minute before I answered the video call. The image came into focus in a harsh wash of fluorescent light. My mother looked wrecked, mascara smudged, lips trembling, one hand pressed against her chest like she was auditioning for sympathy. My father looked furious in that dangerous, quiet way he got when he realized control was slipping. My sister was in the frame too, still in part of her wedding makeup, her hair half fallen out around her face, and even in that moment with everything collapsing around her, she somehow managed to look offended instead of ashamed. Nobody asked how I was. Nobody said they were sorry. My father went straight to business. He said I needed to stop overreacting and listen carefully. The chateau wanted formal clarification on the damaged property. The rental company wanted the contracting party present. And if I flew in immediately, they could still contain the story before the groom's legal team started digging. My mother cut in, crying harder now, saying this was a misunderstanding, that families help each other, that I was being cruel by making things worse when one signature and one statement could calm everything down. Then my sister leaned toward the camera and said the quiet part out loud. She told me I had always been the practical one, the one who fixed things, and I needed to do what I always did for once without turning it into some kind of drama. That was the moment any last trace of guilt died. I asked her if she had any idea how insane she sounded. She rolled her eyes and said I was acting jealous again, that I couldn't stand the idea of one day not being about me, and if I destroyed her wedding over paperwork, everyone would finally see what I was really like. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Even now, with forged documents floating through a police station in France, she still believed the bigger crime was me refusing to protect her image. My father stepped back in and lowered his voice, which was always worse than yelling. He said if I didn't get on a plane, I could forget about any final tuition support, any help with rent, any access to family accounts, any future recommendation or connection they might have offered once I graduated. My mother added that I would also be responsible for humiliating the family in front of Graham, his investors, and everyone tied to the wedding. They were throwing everything at me now. Fear, guilt, money, shame, obligation. The same 4 weapons, polished from years of use. Only this time, I wasn't standing in front of them. I was in my apartment, with my own Wi-Fi, my own laptop, and a private folder full of evidence they didn't know existed. I let them talk until they ran out of breath. Then I told them I wasn't flying anywhere. My mother started crying harder. My sister snapped that I was unbelievable. My father said very slowly, "Do not make me regret everything we've done for you." I almost laughed at that. Everything they had done for me had always come with a hidden invoice. Before he could say another word, I ended the call. For a few seconds, the apartment went completely silent, and in that silence, I did the thing that changed the whole direction of the night. I called Elliot Pike. He had been my grandmother's attorney for years and now oversaw the family trust she left behind. He was one of the only people who had ever looked at me like I wasn't invisible in that family. When he answered, I apologized for the hour and told him I needed 10 minutes, maybe less, to explain something ugly. I expected surprise. What I got instead was a long, measured pause, followed by a calm voice asking me to start from the beginning and leave nothing out. So I did. I told him about the crash, the forged rental paperwork, the police station, the pressure to fly to France and clean it up, the email thread, the document history, the Zoom recording, all of it. He didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, he asked me to send everything immediately to his secure address and not respond to my family again until he had reviewed it. Then he said a sentence that made me sit up straighter in my chair. "This is no longer family drama, Delaney. If what you found is authentic, this is fraud, misrepresentation, and a deliberate attempt to expose a trust beneficiary to liability." Hearing someone say it, that plainly felt like having cold water thrown in my face. For years, my family had survived by turning every violation into a private misunderstanding. Every lie became a miscommunication. Every act of manipulation became a family matter. But Elliot didn't dress it up. He named it. And once it had a name, it became harder for them to hide inside it. I forwarded the files to him one by one, then sent the backup folder link, then the screenshots, then the audio transcript I had already started compiling. He confirmed receipt within minutes. After that, he told me not to delete anything, not to edit anything, and not to get pulled into another emotional call. He would contact counsel tied to the trust, and if necessary, coordinate with the appropriate people handling the liability issue in France. When the line went dead, I stared at my inbox for a long moment, breathing slower than I had all night. My family thought I was panicking. They thought I was cornered. They thought I was one plane ticket away from stepping back into the role they had written for me years ago. What they didn't know was that I had just handed their secret to someone who knew exactly what to do with it. I barely slept that night, but by morning I was sharper than I had been in years. Fear does something strange when it finally burns all the way through. On the other side of it, there was no panic left, just clarity. Elliot emailed me before sunrise with a short message telling me he had reviewed enough to confirm that the files were serious, coherent, and more than strong enough to stop anyone from pinning this on me if I moved quickly and carefully. He told me not to think emotionally, not to argue, not to threaten, and not to warn my family about what I was about to do. He said people like them only knew how to work in shadows, and the fastest way to break that advantage was to drag the facts into places where performance no longer mattered. So that morning, still wearing the same sweatshirt I had slept in, I opened a fresh email draft and started building the message that was going to change everything. I sent it to the legal contact for the chateau, the rental company handling the vintage car, the wedding planner, and the French officer whose name I had written down during the call. Elliot was copied on every line. I kept the wording calm, clean, and brutally specific. I stated that I was a U.S. resident currently in Chicago, that I had not traveled to France, that I had not attended the event, that I had not signed the final liability authorization tied to the damaged vehicle, and that there was strong evidence my name and prior signature had been reused without my consent. Then I attached the proof piece by piece. The document history showing edits made after I was removed from travel. The PDF metadata. The email from my mother instructing the planner to use my information. The message from my sister saying it was easier if I was attached because I wasn't there. The recording from the family Zoom call. I included timestamps, file names, and a short note explaining that I was preserving all originals in case formal review became necessary. I read the whole thing twice, corrected one sentence, and hit send. Once it was gone, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not relief. Something steadier than both. It was the feeling of finally refusing the role they had trained me to play. My phone exploded less than 20 minutes later. My mother called first, then my father, then my sister. Then all three started texting like they had suddenly remembered I was a real person with a pulse and legal value. What did you send? Call me immediately. Delete that email. You are making this worse. My father left a voicemail so furious he sounded like he was grinding his teeth through the words. He said I had no idea what kind of consequences I was inviting, that wealthy families did not appreciate scandal, that international matters could turn ugly fast, and that if I did not undo the damage right away, I would regret this for the rest of my life. My sister sent something even uglier. She said I was doing this because nobody looked at me the way they looked at her, because I couldn't stand seeing her happy, because I would rather burn down the wedding than accept that I was the difficult daughter nobody wanted around. I stared at that message for a long moment before putting my phone face down on the table. Even then, even with evidence sitting in multiple inboxes on 2 continents, she still couldn't imagine a world where the issue was what they had done instead of how I had reacted to it. Around noon, the first reply came in from the wedding planner. Her tone had changed completely from the polished warmth she used in the months leading up to the event. Now she sounded precise, nervous, and very awake. She thanked me for the materials and said there appeared to be discrepancies between earlier draft documents and the final authorization packet submitted before the ceremony. 40 minutes after that, the rental company replied and confirmed that the most recent upload tied to the liability form had not come from any known device previously associated with my communications. Then Elliot called and told me to sit down before he kept talking. The Chateau's council had reviewed enough to support a broader inquiry into falsified responsibility records connected to the property damage. The police were no longer looking at this as a simple issue of an out-of-control wedding moment. They were looking at who had tried to redirect blame after the fact and why. I remember walking to the window after that call and just standing there with my hand on the sill, looking out over a gray Chicago afternoon that suddenly felt cleaner than the entire fantasy my family had flown across the ocean to protect. They had spent years treating me like the emergency exit they could kick open whenever smoke filled the room. That morning, for the first time, the door stayed shut. My phone buzzed again with a message from my mother that sounded less furious and more frightened than anything she had sent before. "Delaney, please. You've made your point. Don't do this to your sister." I typed one sentence back and deleted it. Then I typed another and deleted that too. Finally, I sent the only words that felt true. "You decided I was your backup plan. I decided not to be." After that, I stopped replying altogether. A few hours later, Elliot forwarded me a formal notice that there would be a remote hearing to clarify liability, chain of authorization, and the authenticity of the submitted records. I would be allowed to participate from Chicago. They wanted everything preserved and accessible. I read the notice twice, then closed my laptop and sat very still in the middle of my apartment, listening to the silence. My family had spent my whole life assuming that if they pushed hard enough, I would fold. But now the pressure had shifted. This time they weren't dealing with tears in a kitchen or guilt on a late-night call. They were dealing with records, timelines, metadata, and people outside the family who had no reason to protect them. And whether they realized it yet or not, Their safety net had just become the thing pulling them under. By the time the remote hearing began, it was already evening in France and early afternoon in Chicago. I had changed into a clean sweater, pulled my hair back, and set my laptop on the small table by the window where the light was best. I did not want to look dramatic. I did not want to look hurt. I wanted to look like the one person in this entire mess who had nothing to hide. When the call connected, the screen filled in piece by piece. First, the chateau's legal representative, then the rental company manager, then the wedding planner who looked like she had not slept, then the French officer I had spoken to the night before. And finally, one by one, my family. My mother looked pale and brittle, like she might crack if anyone used the wrong tone. My father had that stiff, furious posture he wore whenever he could feel authority slipping out of his hands. My sister looked ruined in the most expensive way possible. Her makeup was redone, but not well enough to hide the damage. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, her eyes were swollen, and sitting just off to the side, straight-backed and unreadable, was Graham. He said nothing when I appeared on screen. He just looked at me for one long second, as if trying to measure how much of what he had been told about me had been a lie. The hearing started with formalities, then moved quickly into the issue of liability. The chateau's counsel explained that a protected stone fountain on the grounds had been seriously damaged by the bridal vehicle during an unauthorized maneuver for wedding photographs. The rental company confirmed the car had been operated outside the approved staging path. Then came the contract. The final liability authorization was shared on screen. My name appeared in bold at the top, followed by the recycled signature I knew better than my own reflection. For a moment nobody spoke. Then the officer asked me, in calm English, whether I recognized the document and whether I personally executed it. I said no. I said I had never been in France, never authorized the final version, and never consented to take legal responsibility for that vehicle or any damage caused by it. My father jumped in immediately, saying I had always handled logistics and must have forgotten what I approved in the rush. My mother started crying again, saying the whole family had been under pressure and this was spiraling out of proportion. My sister tried a different angle. She said I was resentful, that I had always struggled when attention was on someone else, and that I was now weaponizing technical confusion because I couldn't stand that her wedding had been beautiful and important. She was halfway through that speech when Elliot, who had joined quietly on my side of the call, asked for permission to submit clarifying materials. The screen changed. First came the edit history from the drive. The dates were highlighted. The version tied to my name had been modified after I was removed from the travel schedule. Then came the metadata from the PDF. Then the email from my mother instructing the planner to use my information for the liability paperwork because I handled admin anyway. My mother actually stopped breathing for a second when that one appeared. I saw it happen. Her whole face froze. My father leaned forward and said the message was being taken out of context, but no one on the call seemed interested in helping him find a better one. Then the planner was asked whether I had been physically present at the chateau at any point during the wedding week. She answered no. She confirmed that all in-person decisions had been made by my family. She also confirmed that I had not participated in the final transportation walkthrough and that certain last-minute document substitutions had not come from the channels I previously used. The silence after that felt heavy enough to touch. And then the recording was played. I had heard it already, but hearing it in front of everyone else was different. My father's voice came through first, clipped and practical, talking about keeping one clean administrative contact tied to risk-heavy paperwork. My mother agreed. Then my sister laughed, light and careless, and said the line that changed the whole room. Delaney is useful when paperwork needs someone to land on. Nobody moved after that. Not for a full second. Maybe two. Then Graham turned his head slowly toward my sister with a look I don't think she had ever seen directed at her before. It wasn't anger. It was disgust stripped of emotion. Clean, final, cold disgust. He asked one question, and he asked it so quietly that everybody else on the call fell even more silent trying to hear it. So this was the plan? If anything went wrong, you were going to throw your own daughter under it? My mother tried to answer, but all that came out was some broken version of "we were trying to manage a crisis." My father straightened in his chair and said this had become hostile and unnecessary. My sister began crying for real then. Not the controlled crying she used when she wanted sympathy, but the messy kind that comes when vanity collides with public humiliation. She kept saying it wasn't like that everyone was twisting things, that I had always hated her, that this was sabotage. Nobody on the call looked persuaded. The rental company representative stated that if the authorization was falsified, liability exposure had been intentionally misdirected. The Chateau's counsel said the matter had moved well beyond an unfortunate wedding accident and now involved potentially fraudulent documentation tied to protected property damage. The officer informed the group that additional statements would need to be taken in person from the parties who were present in France, and that certain individuals should remain available for follow-up questioning immediately after the hearing ended. That was the moment my father lost whatever control he still thought he had. He started talking over everyone at once, accusing me of destroying the family, accusing Elliot of overreaching, accusing the planner of incompetence, accusing the entire process of bias. It would have been frightening if it weren't so pathetic. My mother was openly sobbing now. My sister looked toward Graham like she still believed he might rescue her if she cried hard enough. He didn't move. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't defend her. He simply stood up, removed the wedding band box from the table in front of him, and said he was done. Not with the hearing, with all of it. Then he walked out of frame. My sister made a sound I had never heard from another human being, something between a gasp and a scream, and lunged up after him, but an officer stepped slightly into view and told everyone to remain seated until the session was concluded. That was it. That was the exact moment the fairy tale died. Not with shattered stone in a French courtyard, but on a screen, under fluorescent lights, while the truth played back in their own voices. I didn't smile. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being cornered, explained away, or sacrificed to protect the family image. I was just the one who had records. And in the end, records mattered more than tears, money, charm, or whatever version of the story they had always counted on the world believing. When the hearing ended, I thought I'd feel satisfied. Instead, I just felt calm. For the first time in my life, my family's chaos was no longer sitting on my chest. They had spent years calling me selfish any time I refused to clean up their messes. But that day, I finally understood the truth. People who depend on your silence will always call your honesty cruelty. The fallout hit them fast. Because the chateau was a protected historic property, the damage to the fountain was taken seriously, and the fake paperwork made everything much worse. What should have been a private financial disaster turned into a formal investigation into fraud and misrepresentation. My parents and my sister were forced to remain in France while statements were taken and records were reviewed. The wedding never resumed. Guests flew home with their own versions of the scandal, and the family that cared more than anything about appearances became the story everyone whispered about. Graham ended things almost immediately. His lawyers canceled the remaining wedding payments, cut all private arrangements with my family, and made it clear he wanted no future tied to them. That cold, quiet exit destroyed my sister far more than any public fight could have. Within days, her engagement was over. Her luxury brand deals started disappearing, and the carefully polished image she had built online collapsed. She had spent years living off beauty, attention, and access. Now she was the woman whose dream wedding ended in a legal scandal after she tried to frame her own sister. My father's losses ran even deeper. Once Elliot documented the forgery and the attempt to push legal liability onto me, people back home started taking a much closer look at him. A major development deal stalled, business partners pulled back, and lenders started asking questions. The reputation he had spent years building began cracking all at once. My mother lost the social status she valued most. Her board role was suspended, invitations dried up, and the polished image she had guarded for years was replaced by the far uglier truth that she had helped sacrifice one daughter to protect another. Then came the blow that hurt them most. My grandmother's trust had a clause that allowed any trustee acting in bad faith against a beneficiary to be removed. Elliot used it. The forged documents, the setup, and the pressure campaign were enough to trigger a full review. My parents were stripped of their control over the trust, and the portion meant for me was placed safely beyond their reach. For the first time, they couldn't use money as a leash. A month later, I booked a flight to Paris by myself, not to rescue anyone.